fantasy short stories. Of Monsters and Mushrooms by Lesley Herron. Chapter 11, Weapon of Mass Distraction.
Blood alcohol content approaching 0.30%. Initiating system flush.
That delightful, mindless bliss that Vel desperately chased after had just begun to creep into his awareness, snuggling him in its warmth, only to be snatched away as Arthur's words cut through the feeling like a knife. He blinked open his eyes with a growl as he felt the pleasant buzz drain into a more urgent need.
Damn it, Arthur!
Vel climbed unsteadily to his feet. The countless casualties of his recent endeavor littered the ground, and they clinked and rolled away as he shuffled toward a tiny drain cupboard.
You couldn't give me even 15 minutes.
He'd nearly consumed an entire wall of high-end inventory over the last few hours, hoping this time to reach that zenith of drunkenness he so desperately craved. But with every tantalizing approach into blackout nirvana, his onboard nanny purged his body of toxins. Eric hadn't even left him that. Bladder relieved, he zipped up and stumbled back through the chaos of bottles, clarity slowly returning to his hazy brain. He reached for the next shelf, ready to start again, when movement caught his attention. He dropped into a crouch, ready for a fight, when he realized he had been startled by the mirrored wall hidden behind a row of shelves on the other side of the counter. And his reflection. The metal plates fused to his skin, the ugly scar tissue around the edges that resembled sloppy welding lines, and the dead glare that stretched across his mismatched eyes.
That's not me.
A flicker of emotion rippled across that face he didn't recognize, a reminder of why he tried to drink himself to death, and then down to the metal fingers grasped around the neck of a dusty fifth of tequila. Eric's harsh words echoed in Vel's ears, though only bottles and silence surrounded him.
Do you know how disappointed Mom would be if she could see you now?
A crescendo of broken glass shattered the silence, echoing off the narrow walls as he chucked the bottle into his reflection.
Then it's a good thing she'll never have to.
And, with the last shard that fell to join the others, Vel's anger evaporated and his shoulders slumped, the familiar numbness of nothing seeping back into his being. He lamented the loss of good booze and reached for the vodka shelf this time. The bottle bounced away from his reaching fingers as the entire building shuddered from a distant explosion.
Crap!
He bolted for the door, snatching up a bottle of coconut rum on the way out, ready to find a firing squad waiting for him, or maybe another giant worm, or...
Is that a trebuchet?
Attila spun at the sound of his missing for hours friend, and a mischievous smile wormed its way onto his face.
Hell yeah, it is!
He laughed, cranking the pivot arm of the device.
Took you long enough. I thought maybe you'd abandoned me.
He paused in the middle of loading the sling with several propane bottles wedged into a tire full of tent stakes.
Wait, you wouldn't actually do that, would you?
Vel held up a hand, ignoring the question.
Hang on. You built a medieval siege weapon in the parking lot of...
He paused, looking at the building behind him.
For Cod's sake sporting goods?
He failed to stifle the roll of his eyes and the anguished groan at the pun. Frowning, Attila returned to securing the payload, adding in half a bucket of rusty fishing lures, just in case, then adjusting the trajectory.
When you say it like that...
He yanked on the release arm.
It sounds ridiculous.
What are you doing?
Vel watched as the counterweight swung downward, pulling the beam of the trebuchet up, and the momentum flung the makeshift bomb into the air with surprising hostility. It sailed gracefully out of sight, The only hint of where it landed, the small explosion that forced a rather tall building in the distance to completely collapse in on itself.
Causing a distraction?
Attila shook his head in disbelief.
Obviously.
He reached for another propane bomb when the cyborg caught his arm and shot him a questioning look that clearly said,
"Explain."
He let out a harumph and replied,
The building where your bro and my buddy were gonna exit from is that way.
He pointed toward the heart of the city.
And we need the soldiers crawling all over this area to go that way.
He paused, pointing in the opposite direction,
so we can sneak past them and find Brig before he gets too hungry and eats that little guy.
Back up.
Vel held out a hand.
How do you know they're in that direction? Unless you've got exceptional spatial awareness, how could you track them back to some random spot?
Duh.
Attila began cranking the weapon of mass distraction back into place.
Just use your HUD map. Your AI can track everywhere you've ever been by longitude and latitude. They'd be about 4 miles southeast of here.
Vel cleared the shame creeping up his neck with a cough.
Right. I totally knew that.
He then hissed under his breath,
Damn it, Arthur, why'd you never tell me about that?
You have declined the tutorial mode on 16 separate occasions. Would you like to go over it now?
With a grumble, Vel whisked away this information, only to have his attention immediately drawn to the first convenient distraction. And to his genuine surprise,
Did you build that out of a telephone pole?
The merc barked another laugh.
Sure did.
Attila secured the sling release and aimed the contraption slightly farther to the left this time.
How did you lift a telephone pole all by yourself?
And the same way they built the pyramids.
Attila hoisted another mess of propane tanks, tires, and lighter fluid into the sling.
Aliens?
Tugging on the release arm, the counterweight swung into action and lobbed the jumble of junk into the air, expertly demolishing another building in the distance. Attila frowned as he turned on the cyborg.
Don't tell me you're a tinfoil hatter, too.
He clucked his tongue at the man.
No, I built this baby with levers and math.
Oh, yeah, I guess that makes more sense.
It's not as hard as you'd think. I once erected a replica of the Stone Sisters outside Briggs' bedroom while he slept, just to mess with him.
Vel scratched behind his ear. He'd heard a drunken tale or two of the Stone Sisters. Similar to the Easter Island from his own home, this tiny hunk of land had been filled with giant stone women. Many were more spherical boulder than human-shaped, and some were so large, how they were moved from the quarries remained a mystery to this day. He lifted a finger, ready to inquire further, when something far more important crossed Vel's mind. Something so critical he needed to ask before anything else happened.
Can I have a turn?
A shy, silly smile tugged at his lips. Attila stepped away with a grand swing of his hand.
Have at it, friend. Should only need a few more distractions, and then we can head out. Want to get moving before they triangulate our position.
Whatever the merc was babbling about, Vel hadn't registered it. He was about to do something so amazing and so reckless that his 12-year-old self would have peed his pants in envy. His fingers wrapped around the rope of the release arm, and with a laugh of pure joy, he yanked. Whoosh! The payload shot into the air, soaring the same trajectory as the previous round, and exploded spectacularly in the distance. A giddy thrill overtook him, and a childish laugh rumbled free.
That was awesome. Do we have more stuff?
Someone cleared their throat.
Ahem. I think the two of you have had enough fun.
Uh-oh.
Vel whirled around at that unfamiliar voice to see a line of shotguns aimed in his direction, just out of reach. His hands slowly lifted into the air as he registered more bodies marching their way, weapons raised. The soldier who had spoken straightened up, narrowing an icy gaze at them.
Cuff 'em and bag 'em, boys. Let's take these spies back to the interrogation chamber.
Spies? We're not spies. We're,
Attila, following the cyborg's lead, raised his hands in the air. His eye darted to the rather damning evidence of a 20-foot-tall trebuchet, and his grin faltered.
Lost hikers, trying to get the attention of a rescue party?
His reward for such an artfully crafted lie? Attila grumbled as someone shoved a filthy burlap sack over his head.
So, let me get this straight.
A stern woman wearing a navy beret atop her tight ringlets of red hair studied them in silence for a long moment.
You are a pair of traveling priests going from town to town feeding orphans.
Her thick accent rolling off her tongue with disbelief.
But got lost and ended up where you...
She looked down at her notes.
Stumbled across some bad guys using a trebuchet, but valiantly chased them off before my men found you attempting to disarm said device and mistook you as the perpetrators.
Her acid-green eyes swiveled to the man in the poncho. The poncho, mind you, that had contained more weapons, tools, varied implements of dubious nature, and rubber ducks than she cared to count.
This is the story you're going with?
Attila let out a wounded scoff.
You forgot the part where we saved an elderly man from being eaten by a grime golem.
She closed her eyes for a moment, sucking in a breath through her nose for patience, then opened them on the cyborg.
I'll ask you instead. What are you doing in my territory? And why did you attack 4 of our bases? Who sent you?
Vel shrugged.
What he said.
At this point, he knew he was just being petty. But they had been in this room for over an hour. And after being trucked off to God knows where, marched into a dank room, handcuffed to a table, and interrogated nonstop, he didn't feel like sharing further. Outside their little room, in what had to be a retrofitted school gymnasium, boots beat out a rhythmic pattern as sergeants shouted orders while vehicles trundled down the nearby road. Rather than sneaking past the army base, they were smack dab in the middle of it. At this point, Vel reasoned, they were screwed regardless of what they said.
I want the truth!
The woman slammed her hand down on the table.
From the beginning! Well, you see, it all started with that curious thing called fate.
Attila sat forward, his hands flaring open to display the mysticism of that word.
My ma and pa met at a demolition derby, and the two of them hit it off. One thing led to another, and a few horizontal tangos later, I was born.
Their interrogator, a captain judging by the insignia on her sleeves, whipped her gaze back to Vel with a look that asked silently,
Is this guy an idiot?
And he nodded silently.
I grow weary of your lies. First, you completely destroy the Baywood district.
She stood and strode over to a large map on the wall, striking the appropriate area.
Then one of my men is found dead.
She smacked a different spot.
2 figures matching your descriptions were sighted fleeing the scene. And finally,
another pointed jab.
You are caught red-handed, strategically targeting our outpost with a catapult. Clearly, you are some saboteurs sent here to impede us.
She spun back around, slamming her hands down on the table for a second time.
Confess!
Vel began to chuckle at the wake of their destruction, but paused as he mentally retraced the spots she had first gestured to.
Hang on. Baywood is about 4 miles southeast of where you found us.
He shook his head.
We didn't do that, but I think I know who did.
Aha! A confession!
Attila caught the cyborg's gaze, both of them coming to the same realization. Baywood sat above the worm-infested cavern. Vel sat up, shooting the captain a look that could scour paint.
We're not your enemies. We're on assignment from Madam Whisper, and we've been separated from the rest of our party. Check our belongings again.
He nodded to the pile in the corner, although it primarily consisted of the Merc's arsenal of miscellaneous junk.
You'll find our orders with her seal.
Assuming they are not forgeries, this is still a restricted area. I would be fully within my rights to have the two of you face a firing squad.
The door burst open, dulling the impact of her threat, and a scrawny soldier in fatigues, 2 sizes too big, stumbled in, panic written plainly on his face as he saluted.
Captain?
From the hall outside, other soldiers rushed about, the air full of shouts and chaos. She lashed out a hand, snatching hold of the young man.
What's happening? We have action on the eastern perimeter, ma'am. Multiple incursions.
He swallowed hard.
They've breached the gates.
With only a bevy of curses, the captain fled the room with her subordinate in tow, leaving Vel and Attila chained to the table. The door slowly swung shut, blocking out the pandemonium outside.
Huh. That can't be good.
The sound of metal scraping against metal drew Vel from his musings, and he glanced to the Merc to see his face only inches from the cuffs around his wrists, attempting to pick the lock with 2 halves of a broken bobby pin.
What are you doing?
Listen, whatever it is out there has provided us the perfect distraction to get out of here. But if we don't leave now...
Attila scraped around the inside of the lock.
We'll either be executed, imprisoned for life, or eaten by whatever monster is currently snacking on armored tanks out there.
Realizing the Merc had a point, Vel reached over to his mechanical hand, gripping it at the wrist. He twisted it hard to the left, detaching the joint from his forearm, and slid free from the cuff. Licking his lips for courage, he snapped his hand back onto his wrist, rejoining them with a click. As the nerves reconnected, pain shot through his system like he'd stuck a fork in a light socket. He hunched over on the spot, gritting his teeth through the agony as the seconds ticked by, until the pain subsided. He collected himself after a moment, and, jumping to his feet, Vel broke the hinge on the remaining cuff between 2 of his fingers, then reached over, doing the same for Attila. He moved to the door, psyching himself up.
All right, we go out there.
He pushed a finger against the metal surface.
Help them fight whatever it is, and then try to escape in the chaos. Sound good?
Attila blurted out a noise of indignation.
Heck no! They were all too happy to string us up, so let's return the favor.
He smiled as he jerked his thumb in the opposite direction.
I say we grab our gear, blast anyone who tries to stop us, then maybe raid the armory on the way out.
Like a fish, Vel opened and closed his mouth several times, attempting to make an argument, then shrugged when he failed to find one. Once again, the Merc had a point. They loaded up and made their escape, darting down hallways, navigating by flickering lights overhead, until they eventually found an emergency exit. Luckily, they encountered very little pushback, as the chaotic situation called for all hands on deck. Blinded by the afternoon sun, the 2 of them stumbled through the streets and narrow alleyways until they could no longer hear the screams and gunfire from whatever was transpiring behind them. More twists and turns led them farther into the city, where silence became a thick and heavy presence. After 10 straight minutes of blindly running, Vel skid to a stop at the exit of an alley, staring up at monstrous mushrooms growing atop nearly every building in sight. He paused, Arthur focusing in on the tiny particles floating down around them like snow.
Ah, crap.
He jabbed the Merc in the gut, motioning for him to follow his lead as he wrapped a length of cloth around his nose and mouth. Attila stumbled back from the prod, and it took him a moment to realize what the cyborg had poked him for.
Oh, right.
Veronica whipped out his trusty respirator, the one with a toothy smile painted across the yoke of the mask, and he shoved it on his face.
Where the hell are we?
Good question.
Attila glanced to his left, then his right, seeing only barren and empty streets in either direction. I don't see anyone around to ask.
You want to ask for directions?
Wow, toxic masculinity much? Attila rolled his one eye. It's okay to do that these days, but whatever, I brought a map. He ignored the cyborg's glare and took the large folded paper handed to him by Veronica and splayed it open across the hood of the nearest vehicle. He pressed flat the creases and squinted down at the lines and dots marked across the page.
Wait, did you steal that off the wall?
Of course! A hidden smile split across Attila's face. From the sounds of it, they're not gonna need it anymore. Frowning, Vel leaned in, glancing over the merc's shoulder and down at the map. Nearly every block had some sort of annotation, except in large areas that were marked off with red ink, where only the major landmarks like government buildings and tourist attractions were listed, likely transcribed from other maps. He drew a line with his finger to a large, unlabeled black dot.
This must have been where we were being held.
The other areas marked by the captain lined up with where they had been found. He looked up, squinting down the street. Arthur honed in on a sign at the end of the block. He turned back to the map and studied it for a moment, moving his finger when he found the same name.
This is where we are.
He glanced over to the gangly merc.
And from what the woman said,
he moved his finger southeast.
The spot Eric and the others came up through is gone.
I did try to tell you not to use so many grenades. You think they're, Bell shook his head.
No point in thinking like that. Assuming they're alive, where would they go?
Attila scratched beneath his gambler's hat, staring down at the map in contemplation for several long minutes. Brig might have dragged them to the grocery stores and restaurants. He pointed at a few locations between marked dots on the map. Or probably a hospital if someone was hurt. Oh! He lurched forward, slamming his finger down on the paper. Look! An adult bookstore! He glanced up with a twinkle in his one eye. I'd bet money that's where they're holed up.
Eric, in an adult bookstore.
What? Maybe he's reading a book. Attila shrugged. It's where I'd go. Vel tossed his head back with a groan. But the idea of his brother doing something that obliviously nerdy gave him an idea. He turned back to the map, scanning for the tourist areas clearly marked across its surface. He had a strong feeling he knew where they needed to go, and as his finger stumbled into the red area, he let out an exasperated sigh.
Any idea what exclusion zone means?
Staring up at a dusty engraved billboard, it took every ounce of willpower Eric possessed to not tear the entire thing down. The words, "Is space travel possible?" dug deep into his skin, irritating him beyond reason. Seldom did he run across such stark reminders that this world had not followed the same trajectory as his own. Another board hung below it, filled with research findings and mathematical vectors, all of them wrong, about the improbability of space travel. Sure, they believed in aliens, well, at least Brig did, but space travel? No, that's where they drew the line. He grumbled, forcing himself to step away from that exhibit. Despite his interest in the subject matter, if he lingered, he'd likely spend the remainder of the night attempting to correct every miscalculation, every misguided concept, and end up rewriting their entire understanding of how space worked. The worst part? This hadn't even been the first exhibit like this. How could a world, similar in history and culture to his own, have such a twisted understanding of science? And somehow manage an advanced level of technology? It infuriated him to his core. But he rationalized to himself, warfare was the greatest driver of innovation, and this planet had the scars to prove it. Eric spun on his heel, heading back for the main lobby where the others were still working. Evan and Brig had scoured around, moving queue line stanchions, tables, and chairs in front of every marked exit door, successfully barricading themselves inside the building. He had been tasked with checking for other entry points when he'd been sidetracked by all that misinformation. As he approached the main doors, hidden behind a tall stack of junk, he couldn't fight back the thought that perhaps being locked inside with no way out hadn't been their best idea. Eric turned to the glass panes that used to let light in, staring instead at an inch-thick layer of grime and dust. It blocked out the sun and the view of who or whatever was knocking impatiently at the doors. It gave the room a gloomy... Wait. Knocking? He glanced over his shoulder to see Brig and Evan had shuffled in behind him, gun and knives held at the ready. Eric stepped back. You want to go peek outside, see who it is? Brig barked a hearty laugh.
Ain't no way I'm going first. It was your idea to come in here and your idea to block us in. You do it.
Swallowing hard, Eric returned his attention to the door as it began to rattle frantically. Whatever stood outside had grown impatient. He whimpered, looking back at the tiny merc, who only shook his head and encouraged him with a menacing flick of his knives. Giving in, Eric shuffled closer to the vestibule, stopping long enough by the display of medieval suits of armor to wrench free a spear from one of the mannequins. Now armed, he pushed the chairs out of the way, nudged the boxes with his shoe, and dragged the table away by several inches. And slowly, so very slowly, he reached for the handle. The door flung open with a bang, and, acting before he could think, Eric swung the weapon like a baseball bat, not that he knew how to use one of those either, aiming for whatever creature attempted to force its way inside. But a metal hand snapped out, grasping tight around the business end of the spear and halting the downward momentum with a bone-jarring efficiency. He blinked several times, his brain finally registering that garish red coat. Vel? Let us in! Attila cried out, panic laced between the words. Brig grinned, giving Evan a nudge.
Told you, like a cockroach. Move, you idiot!
Vel struggled to shove himself the rest of the way through the barely cracked entryway, resigning himself to clambering over the piles of junk. He collapsed onto several hard boxes with a grunt, looking back between the legs of the lanky idiot still trying to climb inside. He caught sight of the thing that had sent them bolting for the main entrance in the first place. A pit dropped into his stomach at the sight of a literal horde of skeletal zombies running toward them at a speed something long dead shouldn't be able to achieve. Vel rolled to his feet and grabbed the merc by his poncho, dragging him in through the narrow opening. Quick! He set the man down and turned back to the door, slamming it shut before the undead could reach them.
Help me get the barricade back up!
Wood screeched against marble as the three of them forced the table back into place, quickly followed by anything not bolted to the ground. The vestibule had been completely filled with piles of loose furniture, mannequins, cash registers, and the museum's entire stock of plushy mascots when they finally felt it sturdy enough to hold against the creatures. Vel's lungs burned as they waited, listening to the pounding squelch of rotting fists on wood, praying the doors would hold. 12 agonizing minutes later, the horde outside tired themselves out, and silence befell the museum and the streets beyond once again. He sighed in blissful relief, staggering into the lobby to lean against the visitor's counter. Vel shot his brother an incredulous look.
You didn't tell me there'd be zombies out here. Zombies aren't real.
What the heck were those things then? Attila collapsed to the hard marble floor, staring up at the giant placard displaying the name of the museum and the symbol of a feathered quill over an open book.
'cause I shot a few of those things, and they just got right back up." He raised himself slowly into a sitting position, arms outstretched in an overdramatic portrayal of said zombies. "Brains!" Eric opened his mouth with a lift of his finger, ready to explain exactly what those things were, in great detail, when his brother shushed him with a look. He folded his arms across his chest, pouting. "I don't think we should stay here." Evan squinted through a small dust ring at the bottom of the nearest window. "They're just standing out there, waiting."
"We don't have time to find somewhere else."
Eric pointed to the fading beam of dirty sunlight that poured in from the western windows.
"It'll be dark in the next 10 or 15 minutes, and I don't want to be out there in the
"Dead of night?"
Attila cut in with a cheesy grin. Wiggling his fingers, he added, "Brains." Vel groaned.
"Okay, look, these places are built like fortresses. Maybe it can keep those things out. But just to be safe, grab whatever you've got and let's move up a floor. If they somehow manage to find a way in, I'd rather have the high ground."
"Oh, I can booby-trap the stairs!"
Attila's mind had already begun to plot. The five of them nodded in agreement, and they gathered their scattered gear, making their way to the second floor. Before ascending, however, Eric tugged Vel to the side and pulled that novelty toothbrush from his pack and offered it up.
"I'm glad you're all right."
Raising an eyebrow, Vel took the clearly child-sized toothbrush with the red dart frog.
Thanks.
"It's in your color." Eric smiled, patting his brother on the shoulder, then turned to follow the others up the stairs before Attila could arm his traps. Vel remained rooted, staring at the little token. Eric had done something thoughtful? He must have been truly shaken. He snorted a laugh as he pocketed his little treasure and climbed the steps, deftly avoiding the swinging log contraption currently being erected. The others had grouped in the large junction of walkways, each path leading to a separate part of the building. Brig had managed to find, and tear free, a giant tent from the Expedition of the World's Rainforests display, and had set it up where they were to camp for the evening. They chatted with each other in hushed tones near the mouth of said exhibit, recounting their time separated. Vel shook his head. Why they felt the need to cram themselves inside a tent while indoors made no sense to him, but he had no desire to join them. No, the bottle of scavenged hooch called to him, and he entered the rainforest exhibit to find a nice spot to get plastered.
"And hopefully for more than 15 minutes this time, Arthur."
Vel's mood shifted as he stood among the papier-mâché trees and plastic leaves. He could imagine how this place must have looked when the city had been alive with people and electricity. He could hear the sound of birdsong warbling on the overhead speakers, feel the damp moisture on his skin from the misters hidden in the painted canopy, and smell the earthy scent of petrichor. Long-forgotten memories stirred to life in his chest, and he wandered through the fake forest, staring up at taxidermied animals. He nearly smiled at the display of fireflies, though their lights no longer worked. But that moment of happy nostalgia evaporated as he neared the end of the exhibit and came to a stop in front of a tall display case that housed 30 or so glass terrariums in different sizes, all of them designed to look like miniature greenhouses and home to small, self-sustained ecosystems. In the middle of an abandoned museum, in the heart of a city in total apocalyptic decay, sat a wall of healthy green plants. Memories of home rushed in. That horrible 4-letter word. Vel reached out a hand, his mechanical fingers brushing gently against the surface of the display as the last vestiges of sunlight waned. Plunged into near darkness, he leaned in closer and pressed his forehead to the glass. If he still had a heart, it would have shattered.
"I miss you,"
he whispered to no one as the night settled in around him. Thank you for listening to Of Monsters and Mushrooms, the rewrite of Book 1 by Lesley Herron. Join us as we post new chapters roughly every other week. If you would like to listen to the entire book, or her other novels in the series, you can do so at talltaletv.com/series, or by using the link in the description. And up next, we'll be going back in time with our Origins of Life exhibit.
Oh, wow.
Ooh.
Cool.
As you can see here, our top scientists have recently been able to determine that the world is, in fact, a whopping 6,000 years old.
No way.
I read about that.
I can count to 6.
I know. Hard to believe when just a decade ago our brightest minds dated it at only 2,000 years. That is almost 4 times as much.
Oh, that's incredible.
4? Yes. Moving on. We see in our next display... Hey, no touching. We see the majestic dinosaurs emerging onto land for the first time.
Dinosaurs!
Quite a surprise for our ancestors, no doubt, which you can see here hunting a T-Rex for food.
Ooh.
I bet I could take on a T-Rex.
No, you can't, man. It's like 3 times your size.
Next up, early astronomers. You can see our ancient ancestors here observing the heavens, chiseling their findings into these monoliths. Fun fact, their star charts still hold up to this day.
No way! It's awesome.
Though they didn't get everything right, as they believed the Earth to be a sphere. Can you imagine?
The ancients were right! Wake up, sheeple!
Oh God, another round-earther. Security! Security! Next up, the myth of global warming.
Oh my God.
Dude, are you okay? Were you having a nightmare?
It was horrible. People, they were so dumb.
It's okay. It was just a dream. It's okay.